hello. I am the horticulture educator for Bond, Clinton, Marion, Jefferson, and Washington counties. So I'm here in Southern Illinois, and I personally have a greenhouse. So you'll see some of this as my backyard greenhouse as we're going to go along. But if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me after this presentation if you have further questions that I can help with. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my video now. And then we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, so backyard greenhouses. The purpose of our backyard greenhouse is really to extend the growing season. They're a season extension, and they're increasingly popular for many reasons. You can extend the season for many crops. You can raise seedlings. If you're in a warm season crops, you can propagate landscape plants. An advanced greenhouse system will allow you to grow year-round. Sometimes vegetables, you can keep your tropicals and your house plants. Really, every grower must consider what are your goals before you decide and invest in a system. You know, we want to think about, why are we really wanting it? Is it just to start something, or is there a goal that we need to earn money from this greenhouse? So those are some of the questions that we'll be kind of talking about. So one of the first types of season extenders includes cold frames. And cold frames are really the smallest, the simplest, the least costly, considering for some of those items that you can kind of use as a hobbyist and maybe plant protect some of your seasonal crops as you're getting started. They vary in cost, size, structural complexity, and the ability for year-round usage. The small cold frame is the most affordable option for beginning growers. You can see from the photo that Nancy let me borrow today, these are screened in, they can be raised and lowered. They're really not for commercial use, but they're definitely used for winter protection and forcing. The next option that you might want to do is you might want to use low tunnels. Low tunnels are a little more inexpensive type of, able to grab and have that season extension. When we're thinking about season extension, we're using row covers, or we might be using a polyfilm plastic over the top of our low tunnels. And we call them low tunnels or caterpillar tunnels because you definitely can use different sizes as long as it's lower than 6 feet that you're not necessarily able to walk under. This one right here is a low tunnel that I have used onto a raised bed system. You can see I've taken some wire and made hoops for it. On this type of system, what I've used is the row cover is a 1.5 millimeter Agribon row cover. This is for winter protection. And you can see there's a light dusting of snow on this picture. Really, it is to start and kickstart the growing season. And this is allowed. Some have used the polyfilm, but this is a great way to have a low tunnel type of system and be able to use it in your backyard. Another caterpillar tunnel that you might be able to use, it has plastic, and some growers and gardeners will use this row cover, as I did here, really to keep pests off in the early season. As you can see, we have winter. Our dog was out there and kind of playing around. This is how it grew, everything underneath there. Now you have to think about, you need hardy annuals or you need those brassicas and cool season crops. You're not going to be able to do this for every warm season item, but if you plant items such as salad greens, turnips, broccoli, potatoes, many other crops, they can withstand those cold temperatures. Along with that, if you're using the row covers really for pollen, for those crops that don't require pollination, you can use these in early season. The one thing is you're going to think about is if an item does require pollination, you're going to have to pull it off and allow that pollination to happen. You can provide this when early protection in the season from pests and squash bugs and all that. But you have to think about when it's time for it to pollinate. If you're really needing it to pollinate or to hybridize an item that you're really wanting to keep those seeds, you're going to have to remove that row cover. But this is a great way to kind of think about it, of something as early season to get started. High tunnels, and I'm going to touch on this. Typically, high tunnels are larger than cold frames or low tunnels. They allow for a more efficient use of floor space. You can grow larger, taller plants to full maturity. They can be used by home gardeners, but are more often used by the commercial growers or farmers for the production of specialty crops. What I use mine for is for fruit and vegetable crops, but also cut flowers are grown in this production method. It's early season, and then again, to extend it, you can do summer crops, but extend it to that fall season. They are often constructed with hoops anchored into the ground, as you can see here. Hoop spacings can be narrowed for structural strength, or the addition of internal supports like roof purlins and wind braces. They can be added, and this is really for your trellising of tomatoes and trellising of cucumbers that happen. The end walls typically have a sliding or swinging door used for access as well as air circulation, and occasionally larger doors are used to allow equipment in if you're cleaning the area or you're adding more compost, so that way they can get in when it's necessary. And I understand this is a commercial thing and we're talking about backyard, but a lot of times we want to graduate from our backyard greenhouse into a more formal commercial end of it. And so you can kind of see a lot of people will transition and they'll have hanging baskets that they use. They might use raised bed construction. They will also use some of the shade cloths. And those are things that you might be using along with your backyard greenhouse. So I wanted to kind of point it out. You'll see right here, this is a shade cloth that is used in production. And you can also use those in your backyard greenhouses. If you're wanting to, like this type of temperature, if it's really extreme, that you can reduce and add that shade cloth will reduce the temperatures inside the greenhouse. The big concern is always your weather. Snowfall and storms are always a concern for high tunnels, and even your backyard greenhouses. So just kind of let you remember about that as you're kind of going through and you're thinking about how am I going to transition this, or how am I going to put this in my backyard. Small greenhouses for the backyard, again, think about what are your goals. This one is mine, and my goal at the time was that I didn't want very large investment. I wanted to see if I wanted to really produce in it and I could do it well before I got a larger, more commercial type of high tunnel. So think about how much space do I need? What are you growing? Bigger is generally better, as space can be used in 3 dimensions or utilized by vertical space. You can have hanging baskets and etc. But know what you want to produce and sell and measure backwards. Because in that way, I couldn't put a lot of hanging baskets in a small structure like this, but I could start them on the tables and get them started and then transition them outside. What do you want to sell? Do you want to sell 72 cell trays or quarts or gallons? At that time, you need to think about what am I going to need as far as equipment? What am I going to need as far as container cost? Greenhouses are available in all sizes and shapes and degrees of strength. The one I have here, as you can see, this one is actually assembled and was delivered on site. You can take and buy kits and go ahead and assemble them yourself, and you would have a cheaper cost. This one was pre-assembled. It has a cedar structures. It's poly carbon filled. And so it was actually a kit that I bought at $4,000 and it was delivered. So I guess it depends on what you're wanting to do with it and what your initial cost. The initial cost of hobby greenhouses is widely variable. You could have several $100s to several $1,000s. Operating cost, when we think about that, it's going to vary depending on what you want to grow. And if you want succession planting, so your goal may be only to start some spring seedlings and transition those to the garden, or bedding plants and transition those to containers. So your operating costs are going to kind of vary. So it's hard to tell everybody what your costs will be on that end of it. But think about what you want to do and then decide the location. What you want to think about is you need to have your bottom, you need to have a very well-drained area. I decided I wanted to put mine on just a foundation, so that any excess water would drain out. I also have mine set up, as you see, away from trees, and it's in an east-west orientation. Now, I decided that this is the way I wanted it, in the sense that my north wind is going to hit actually the side of it, right? The north side of it, but I was going to plant most of my seedlings that get started on that south side. So I guess it depends on your location. You want well-drained area, and you want to think about your sun orientation. You also want to think about adhering to the building codes in your city or township. Always call Julie before you dig any utility lines, and consider where are your closest utilities and how far you have to be before they can be installed. All those things are very important whenever you're doing this. Now, we can talk about lots of different types, and we're going to talk about the types of greenhouses. We can get these very inexpensive totes or pop-up greenhouses, and they work for small-scale gardening projects. We can add a light source. We can place them out in location. This one I placed outside behind our office building on the concrete. We started some seeds in there to get in the middle of spring. It's easy to do. You zip it down and you can go. But think about what is important to you and what costs you have. And if you want to just start some things, even totes would work. Materials for bigger projects, though, are what you guys are really going to be having to think about. Materials for greenhouse framing may be composed of untreated wood, aluminum alloy, steel, stone, or brick. The materials you may decide upon will depend on the budget, durability, types of plants to be grown, and the aesthetics of the structure. If it's outside your house, do you want a wood framework? Do you want red cedar, Douglas fir? What you need to think about, though, is not using wood preserves such as creosote. That will cause more issues as far as your plants and having residue. Aluminum and steel are generally colder than wood. So you have to think about, is it in northern Illinois? Are you going to be a little bit colder? When you're thinking about this, small greenhouses and the amount of heat loss, a lot of times is due to, the material and what you have going anyway. So think about, what material am I going to use? If you're building, you also need to think about having people that are going to help you build or have done it before. There's greenhouses, and I have a link on here. You can get different building plans and greenhouse plans for the home gardener. There's a list of plans that if you go to North Carolina State Extension, they have some really great building plans. And those are things that you can look up. A lot of times, some of your Home Depots, your home stores, even a construction class and high school construction class might have some individuals that can help you. So some of the types of greenhouses you can consider getting plans for, they fall into these three types. A lean-to type of structure has one sidewall as part of the house or the garage. An even span greenhouse is similar to a freestanding type of structure, except it's attached to the house at one gabled end. So it's actually more like a three-sided house, greenhouse that's attached to the house. Or you have a freestanding type of greenhouse. And those are really the most versatile when maintaining a good environment. You can kind of control the temperature a little better, but you know, it's really whatever can kind of fall into your area and whatever you prefer. This is a small freestanding greenhouse that was like a potting shed behind this house. This is our master gardener, Teresa. She's had this, and this is a lean-to style greenhouse, as you can see, and it's polycarb. She has a door at one, a screened in door, and then louvers at one end on your north end, and then it's solid on the back end. This has been up for over 20 years and it's still very useful. It's attached to the one side wall is attached to their garage. And this allows, you know, for this to be a little more inexpensive to operate. There's some drawbacks to a lean-to on this one. She has a little bit of limited lighting. She does have, as you can see, some shadowing coming in early morning. Typically what you're going to think about is temperature control and your lighting for the heating and structure. As you go inside though, she really utilizes having it next to her garage because she brings in those utilities. She has her heater there. What she wants to do with hers is really overwinter her, with this propane heater, overwinter her tropicals and her houseplants. And that's important to her. She wants to keep everything alive and overwinter it. And she really doesn't care about starting seeds as much. The other thing that she has in hers is she has benches, but she can see right here on the floor, she did rock with some walking stepping stones. She preferred that over just straight rock because that allowed her a good solid base to stand on. So you want to think about your construction, what means well to you and how you're going to utilize that. She also has this end wall. She has some louvers and with her heater. So when it does get too hot, it's going to allow that extra heat to kind of be accessed out. She tries to do some winter sowing. So she has some jugs in there, but really those slatted benches work well for her for, as she says, when she's draining, watering her plants, and the excess water will drain away from them. So we want to think about when we're looking at setting up our greenhouse, we want to think about it's going to hold heat, right, as a function. So when we increase the daytime temperature, the greenhouse will increase its average daily temperature, right? So it will increase it versus the outside temperature. So your inside temperature of the greenhouse is going to be a little bit higher than what's outside during the day. And then because it's trapping your solar energy. So we know that the greenhouse is going to hold heat as a function of its volume and lose that heat as a function of the surface area. So we want to think about that ratio between those two as being much closer in a smaller structure than in a larger structure. So we want to think about, we know the plants need an average daily temperature to grow. So if we're losing way too much heat, then we know that we're not going to see the growth potential. Those plants are going to be smaller. They're not going to grow as quickly. So we want to really think about what is our size of it, and if we have to add any additional heat to that structure. You can see here on mine, I have where it's vented on there. So that may be something that you want to consider. One more lean-to that I want to kind of show you is a variety opposed to the poly sides, using more of those fiberglass or thinner glass panes as far as your lean-to. So this is another master gardener, Larry. He showed me, let me kind of show you his. He decided to use an outside potting area and allow window vents to kind of control those temperature control. And he said that that works well for him. You can kind of see he wanted to add support holders. He has the window view right here. It allows the excess heat to go out through a window vent opposed to louver vents. He has a potting area. His, again, is a lean-to that's on his shed. He is looking for a smaller space, but he has it to really utilize. During this, though, he has decided that the great way to save money is to use a wood stove unit and adjust the heat according to that. So that allows that wood heat to heat his little lean-to on his shed. The other thing that he kind of recommends is that he likes to utilize for storage. He uses part of his shed that he can use. As he goes into there, all he has to have is a lighting source and additional fans that's going to help circulate all of that heat throughout that little lean-to. And you can see he's got some propagation going on the bench. He can adjust that lighting source up and down, but that works well for him. If you have a freestanding greenhouse, you're going to want to think about, this is kind of a very versatile type. It typically has the 2 roof slopes that are equal pitch and width. What this allows for is that it can accommodate 2 or 3 rows of plant benches so that you can grow. I actually have, as you can see, and I have another picture here, on one side is got benches and the back has benches. On the north side, I actually put some containers that are actually shelving units, so I could have some storage and layer vertical growth as they transition over. There can be some vertical growth. So it can be very versatile. You can have storage in there. You can have your growth going on in there. You can have some vertical elements to it. It really is a great way to grow all year long, and think about how we can use it as being very versatile. Another way we want to think about really depends, when we're looking at how we're going to set up our backyard greenhouse, we really want to think about what is your backyard look like, right? It depends on if you have soil drainage issues. Do you have a little pond or pool, puddling of water? That may not be the greatest place to go, right? Do you have trees? If you're not getting enough light, you may have to think about, I'm going to have to add a supplemental light source. Do you have wind issues? That may be the biggest issue. I actually live up on a hill, and I understand that wind issue. If it's blowing and you have a lot of issues, your north-south orientation may not be what you want. Right here is a great publication from the University of Georgia that kind of lets us know, think about where you're at in the summer sun opposed to your winter sun, right? We know that it's going to kind of change. So when you're starting those, if the sun is moved a little bit in the winter time, and then in the summertime, we want to think about, we're going to be in spring, right? It's not going to be where the orientation is in the middle of summer. It might be skewed over a little bit. So we want to think about when's a great orientation as we go into those spring months. We may need to kind of orientate our greenhouse and where we put it just a little bit. We also can think about construction. This one was a greenhouse that was constructed. It's very low cost. They used polyfilm plastic. So this is 6 milliliter poly plastic, and they used it constructed of wood. And then those are cattle panels that have been arched. You can kind of see here on this picture, I'm going to kind of show you the inside of it. These are cattle panels. This allows for some vertical growth and able to hang baskets on this panel. It was stretched across. You do have some options. One of the options, they went ahead and secured it directly to this wood structure. They have a wire that's like on your high tunnel structures that's called wiggle wire. And they could put a little metal band, pull that plastic down a little bit tighter and put it into that wiggle wire as you would on a high tunnel structure. But they decided they wanted to do it this way to reduce cost. What the theory behind also doing it this way is they could remove that plastic in the middle of the summer and utilize that just as a growing space. So, there's options, and the design really is what you want. So think about that as far as, is there something that you want for your goals? They put some plastic shade cloth at the end of it so they could utilize it. And you can see more elements of raised beds in the interior of this greenhouse. This greenhouse, again, was very economical. They used wood and plastic to kind of use their doors, added a fan to it. They use cups to go ahead and start seedlings. They use buckets. So it doesn't have to cost a lot if you can recycle and reuse. When you are getting started, that's a great way and a great option. This one had a screen door to it. So think about the biggest key is proper sanitation and drainage of everything that you're using. So making sure that you have great drainage in those inexpensive containers is really going to set you up for the best results. So we need to think about items to consider before we build. Storage. Am I going to have a place for storage? Do I need a potting station or table outside of my greenhouse, or do I need to include one inside? Do I need fertilizer to be put in there, injection in the water system? Where is my water system on utilities? All those things, ventilation, water systems, air circulation, all these things we need to consider when we're doing these. Utility will be one of your most limiting factors. Water is key to being successful with a backyard greenhouse. If you have to tote everything, it's going to get very strenuous, and you're going to be, I don't know if I want this, right? If you have to tote it in 100 or 97-degree temperatures like today. So you need to think about the water source. Again, this one right here is a storage unit. If you're not doing vegetables and you're just doing flowers, that might be an option as a rain barrel or another water source. If you're wanting to collect water system, you need to be able to think about what you have available. Do you have city water available? Do you have a pond that you can irrigate with? All those things. If not, you need to really kind of think about where your water source is going to come. We also want to think about heating systems. If we're going to grow full season, are we going to need to have fans or heaters or louver systems? All these things will help regulate those temperatures. And I know you're saying, oh, these are for commercial units, but we need to think about, even in our backyard ones, how can we utilize that same approach? And one way we can do that is by using a solar automatic door. So this is very sensitive. It's an automatic door arm or opener. It opens the door automatically and adjusts, as you see, kind of adjust the doors open. This adjusts when the temperature reaches 60 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit. So as the temperature kind of exceeds your preset, 77 degrees, it starts to exceed that, then it's going to start regulating and opening that door. That automatic door opener is going to start opening that vent or that door and allow that vent and circulation of that outside air to kind of move through it. You may have to think about, is that the best unit for me? Automatic doors are going to be what works for me. Is it going to be, I have on this one, a Dutch door where it opens up on the top. So if it exceeds, temperatures get really hot, the door can be slightly opened or opened all the way. Is there fans in there that you're using? But if you want to stay low cost and you don't want to have to open and close it, even in the middle of winter, sometimes when those degree temperature days get to be up to 70 and on the inside of the greenhouse, those temperatures rise, you might want to have just even this automatic door opener that'll push that open and you don't have to be there. So think about, how am I going to cool down my greenhouse and allow those plants not to get overheated? Another great way is to think about recycled doors, windows. You can use that in your backyard greenhouse, but you want to think about ventilation with that. Is it that you can open those and close them? If there's very stationary, that's not going to be beneficial, even though they might look really pretty, right? They may not be beneficial to you. So you want to think about that. When we think about this, we have, there's many types of heating and heating systems that we can use. It may be the first year, that it's an operating cost, and we need to kind of use a space heater or a hot water system, a radiant system for that first year electric to get it heated, just to kind of regulate through. But we really need to think about the size of our greenhouse and the amount of BTUs that we're going to need to be able to heat it, because it really depends on what type of material you're using and the glazing material, and what is your max and min temperatures on the outside. So that's going to play a factor in that, right? So I have an example here. So if this is a 20 by 100 foot greenhouse, and it has a total of 3,400 square feet of exposed plastic, then we need to think about how are we going to configure this, right? So we need to think that if it's going to get the coldest night temperature is going to be 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and we need to kind of do the difference. We need to calculate the number of exposed feet of glazing on the greenhouse. We want to make sure that we're thinking about the temperature differences. And so this is going to yield 2,300 or 3,800 square feet. So we want to think about now, so this is our yielding total square feet. Now, if the greenhouse is covered with 2 layers of plastic, we need to multiply that square footage by 0.08. If it's only got 1 layer, so if it's glass or plastic, like this one is the glass one, so 0.08. If it's only 1 layer of like plastic, for instance, you might do 1.2. This is going to calculate the required BTU per hour of the capacity of your heater. So this is going to kind of tell you, if I have this, how many BTUs am I going to need per hour to go ahead and heat this greenhouse? So basically what you're going to figure out is the size of the heater that you're going to need is 190,400 BTU per hour. So part of this is going to be, and there's different ways to calculate it, but you're going to need to figure out a BTU. So the size of the heater, you can go to a farm supply store, or you can go to a greenhouse, specialty growers, and talk to them. But if you know kind of average on where you're at on the size of your greenhouse, you need to determine how much heat is it going to need. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to go out and buy the largest heater possible, but you want to think about the BTUs per hour that you're going to need to be able to do that. When we're thinking about that, we know that some of our greenhouses, this one was built out of recycled windows and recycled doors. What you could do in there is possibly even use some passive solarization for that heat. You can put in some larger barrels of water in there, and that could be a passive source of heat that can it heats up that water source inside in those barrels, and then it dispenses it out later into the night as the night temperatures kind of cool down. It dispenses that out into the greenhouse itself. So you can think about those systems that you can use and, maximize your efficiency of your greenhouse so that you don't have to waste and get too much BTU power on that end of it. We know that there's optional systems whenever we're looking at backyard greenhouses. We know that we need to think about benches. If we buy plastic ones, or we look at buying commercial or metal benches, we need to think about, their load capacity. What am I going to be growing? If I'm going to be doing large containers or starting propagation, is it going to be able to withstand it, right? It might start to break. We might have some structural integrity that kind of loses. these can be pre-made or handcrafted, but we need to think about what are you needing? Is it going to be able, if you're going to have a propagation table and have warmers on there, is it able to be conductive? Am I going to have water on those tables and benches? Is that going to cause a shock injury? Any of those things that we need to think about as we're doing this, we need to keep those systems in mind as we do it. We also need to think about optional systems as we go. And this is a little exaggerated, right? Because we know that this is more of a commercial type of setting, but even having a hydroponic, we need to think about, is there a certain fertilization program that we need? Do we need to have fertilizer applied through another system? Is it large enough that I'm needing to have on my outside water faucet? Do I need to have a injection pump? Do I need to have a pulsator that just kind of gives that rate of pressure to my line so I can just water inside my backyard greenhouse? Is a water hose and a faucet, just a regulator, changing the nozzle sufficient enough, or do I need to lower that? We know when we're doing seedlings that we need to lower that water pressure. Otherwise, we'll just blow all of our seedlings out. If we start our seed, it might be going to the side of the tray. We may need to just adjust those nozzle pressures on that and think about that. The rate, the parts per million rate that it's going through. We need to think about our frequency of fertilization if we're using any kind of a liquid type of system. The volume that we're doing, it might leach out our plant growth. We know that whenever it's cooler, cloudier days, we're going to have a slower growth of our plants inside our greenhouse. So it may be that we need to have supplemental lighting with that. Shade cloths or another thing. We have to think about if we're going to add shade cloths earlier into the spring, that May into June, is that going to slow production down? We also know that if we're fertilizing it to try to get it going, is that going to increase some of our excess salt or other, phosphorus or any of our other fertilizers that might cause a buildup because the plant isn't utilizing that fertilizer because it's slowing down just a little bit. So all these things are to consider. Even in a backyard setting, we need to think about how are we utilizing additional systems as we're going. We also want to think if we're going to use different type of additional systems, is there something that works well for what we're doing? It might be that we want to, if we're using a shade cloth, we know that if we're going to use 30 or 40% shade cloth for some flowers, and then we decide we want to grow some tomatoes inside there through the middle of summer, we know that that's not going to be enough shade for those, right? So we need to think about, do we need to change it? Do we need to just grow one crop? All those are considerations as you're starting to grow things. Backyard greenhouses are great. We can start seeds. It can be very economical. What we want to think about is we need to grow items that have seeds that we get it from a reputable company. We want to make sure that we are using varieties that are, great for germination. We want to make sure our germination is doing well. We need to think about, does this item need a cold treatment to germinate, like milkweed? So timing is critical, and spacing is critical. We need to think about how much space do we have and when are we starting our vegetable seeds. So if we decide we're all excited and we want to start in February because we had some warm days and we want to start tomato plants, even though we have a backyard greenhouse, we know that that's not going to really be great, right? Because we can't get those outside to harden off. In March or in early April, our last frost date here in growing zone 6A is not until middle of April. So if I'm starting my tomatoes all the way because I'm excited about them going and get them started in February, they're going to be very large and take up a lot of room. So we need to think about when is our planting date that we can either sell them or take them outside. Now, if our goal is to have them by April and have them large and ready for people to purchase from us, then that's great. But if we're going to utilize them ourselves, think about your timing and your space inside that greenhouse. Otherwise, you're going to have very large plants and no room, and you're going to be very disappointed because they're getting very leggy, they're getting tall, they're needing to have additional support, you're needing to bump them up. We want to think about that, and that really helps with planning on a calendar what I want to grow and what supplies am I going to need to really grow that. Is it to have bottom heat sources, whatever I need. But those are definitely something to consider when you're doing your backyard greenhouse. I wanted to kind of share this one. It does make a big difference by planting early, right? And having these things. If you have season extensions or even in your greenhouse, you can see both of these. These are mahogany splendor hibiscus. And we utilize this at our own farm for foliage and some cut flower bouquets. These were both planted on June 12th. The left side was outside in the garden and the right side was in a tunnel. This is a current picture of them, as you can see, on August the 5th. And you can see that there is a larger growth potential if you use season extensions by planting. Even if you have a backyard greenhouse, if you're going to start seed and direct plant in your garden, you can see that it can be a difference. If you have an early start to your growth, you might see an additional 6 to 12 inches of growth that's going to occur because you've utilized and started those plants in a greenhouse opposed to just direct seeding them out in the garden. But you can see with season extensions, you can have a larger growth and maybe even earlier crop to be able to market if that's what you're wanting to do with your backyard greenhouse. Sanitation is a big thing. We want to think about pests and pathogens. We know that some of those can just be managed with some degree of disinfectants. Example, you might be able dust particles that fall from a growing medium or pot, right? If you're potting in there and you have a small space, they might, those pots may contain some bacteria, some pythium. You might have phytophthora that's kind of growing, and then it falls onto your crop that, maybe below it. So we want to think about really being as sanitary as possible. If we're seeing issues on one corner of your tray, it might be that you need to just discard the whole tray. I know that's heartbreaking to say to get rid of some stuff, even if you're growing it yourself in your backyard, but you definitely want things to be disease-free. So really using and being sanitary with things, using disinfectants can help control some of the pathogens. Some other things might be that you have insects that are coming in. You might see aphids coming early. You might see whiteflies, things like that might start to come in and cause issues. So you want to think about really having a good process for looking at them and really monitoring all those pests. Another thing you want to think about is really, if you're going to recycle and reuse, Sarah kind of let me borrow this slide. We really want to think about scrubbing off and soaking all of our trays and recycled containers. We know that we can use a bleach solution, a 10% bleach solution would work. If we let them soak for about 30 minutes and then rinse and air dry them, it'll help. And we can kind of, we know we can recycle our plastic, but we really want to think about disinfecting them and cleaning them up before we do that. So I know we've kind of been going and I've been fairly quick on it because I want to be able to answer some questions, but we really want to think about what, when we're doing our backyard greenhouse, what are some of your goals? We want to think about, what is our why? My why is to be able to grow some bedding plants and vegetable plants and enjoy starting my own garden from seed. I enjoy wanting to propagate and really think about some propagation methods and how I can get things started and enjoying them earlier in the season than going to the garden center and getting everything. If your why is that you want to start seeds, or you want to grow tropicals, or you want to just hold over your house plants, you might have some lemon trees and orange trees and some items like that you're wanting to keep. That's great. But you're going to need to think about, what space do I need and what type of heating units and then also air circulation and vents that I'm going to need to have to do this. A great way to think about when you're doing backyard greenhouses on your budget is that you need to work backwards. Like I said, we need to start small and expand your knowledge on what you want to grow. That will kind of set you up for success. We also want to think about, if you have a large budget, this one is an 8x16 greenhouse. It might be that you can go a little larger, or you might even have more of a gabled or a gazebo type of one. That's great. Think about, what building material you want to use and how you're going to vent that space in there. I have seen where some of them have asked about aquaponics, and that's something that can be done with a backyard greenhouse. The thing is you're depending on your growing zone. You want to think about the temperature, the outside temperature, and how you're going to vent that. I have seen a couple different growers use rabbits or chickens inside their backyard greenhouse. The problem with that is, making sure that they're not going to damage any of the plants, but they want to utilize them for heat. So that might be an option. I would say you definitely need to think about the size of your greenhouse and the construction of your tables so that you can accommodate both species of being in there. Also, you'd want to think about your management of any manure issues and raw manure that might be, utilized in that capacity of it. Again, visit your local extension office. You have horticulture educators throughout the state that are able to help you. I did give you a couple of resource links here at the bottom of this page. It can kind of let you know there's some plans that you can utilize if you're going to build your own backyard greenhouse with this. And I'll go ahead and put this up to kind of give a brief survey of backyard greenhouses and kind of let them know that we have, I'll bring this back up. We have past recordings of our 4 Seasons gardening series on our YouTube channel. You're welcome to go back and pick up the recording of the 4 Seasons anytime. And again, my name is Chris Luking. This is my contact information.